On this Wednesday night, dangerous winter weather, the miserable mess in the Maritimes, and a polar vortex plunging the prairies into a deep freeze.
And I just love this so.
Plus, the next weather system sweeping in. Ecuador descends into gang violence.
It's really quite an astonishing and worrisome new trend.
What ignited it and the constant fear among residents.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There are warnings about storms and bone-chilling temperatures in nearly every province and territory tonight. From heavy snow and rain slamming the Maritimes to a deep freeze on the prairies, there's no question winter is here and it is packing a punch. High tide coincided with strong winds in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, creating a huge storm surge. Thousands across the Maritimes lost power. Schools across PEI and New Brunswick were closed as a storm delivered a mix of snow, rain and wind. Further west on the prairies and parts of central and northern BC, it is dangerously cold. The wind chill could make it feel like minus 40 or 50 into the weekend. We have it all covered with reporters in Calgary, Toronto and Halifax, and that's where Heidi Petracek starts us off tonight.
This wharf in the New Brunswick village of Grand Manan took a beating as the system hit the Maritimes.
We certainly saw water breaking over other wharf structures here on the island. A lot of water in people's backyards, coming out close to the roadways.
Waves pounding the coast in other places too, but all the wind and rain wasn't even the start. Most affected by this system began their day by clearing snow. With widespread school closures throughout the Maritimes, folks in Fredericton and beyond digging out.
Winter's missed us for quite a period of time, so we're due.
Heavy wind and rain knocked out power for as many as 7,700 electricity customers in Nova Scotia.
We saw winds in the 85 to 95 kilometer an hour range. And in some cases, that did cause trees to come down into our power lines.
In the Halifax area, it's localized flooding that is the biggest concern rather than shoveling snow, because this system is bringing plenty of rain and high wind gusts. Water pooling on Halifax streets and turning an outdoor skating rink into more of a swimming pool. The wintry blast hit Ontario and Quebec first, dumping heavy snow.
It's January and I like seeing white.
Delaying flights in Ottawa and creating hazardous driving conditions.
Particularly early this morning, some very high cases of drainage issues, so water ponding along roadways. By the time it hit Quebec, significant snowfall kept plows busy, which along with strong winds, closed schools and cut power to thousands.
One of our workers reported that there was a carport that was blown off by the wind and landed in the line. So that's the kind of things that workers in the field are dealing with right now.
As the storm now blows on east, Newfoundland is next. Once this one is done, there's another on the way this weekend. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
On the prairies, a polar vortex has settled in. In some areas this week, it could be colder than it's been in decades, and people are figuring out how to deal with it. Here's Heather Yourex-West.
It's a uniquely Canadian labor of love. Volunteers braving the elements to get the neighborhood ice rink ready for the kids.
Actually, other than the thumbs, we're really good so far. Dressed warmly and whatnot, so it's good.
After a mild start to the season, the prairies are now firmly in winter's grip, thanks to the polar vortex.
It's very cold from someone who's travelling from Australia. I've never experienced anything below -10.
The icy weather a matter of life and death for the unhoused.
We all have the luxury of getting into vehicles that are warm or going to a warm home. Unfortunately, this part of the community doesn't get to do that.
But there were tense moments in Edmonton when police moved in to dismantle an encampment as temperatures hovered around 20 below.
Things only get colder as the week goes on. By Friday, many areas of the prairies are looking at daytime highs of -30, made even more frigid with the wind chill.
Areas like Calgary haven't seen daytime highs at -30 for a couple of decades, since the early 2000s. So it is rare for areas as far south as Calgary, even if you look towards Regina and over in parts of the interior of BC.
The northern prairies could see wind chill making it feel like -50. When it's that cold, frostbite can happen very quickly. Vehicles can disappear very quickly too. As part of an awareness campaign Wednesday, Lethbridge police found 45 vehicles idling, unlocked and unattended. The cold weather giving would-be thieves plenty of opportunity for their crimes. Still, it is January in Canada, and the most seasoned Prairie residents are taking the cold in stride.
I just love the snow. I love my winters. I live by Manitoba.
Heather, Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
So what are we in for? Well, Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell is with me. Anthony, there are more winter weather systems on their way.
That's right, Donna. It's kind of daunting when you think of a storm taking a very similar track with the same or even stronger intensity as this one that's still impacting parts of Atlantic Canada with those tremendous winds, very heavy rain, and for Newfoundland and Labrador, lots of snow, locally 30 or more centimeters. So once this low moves out, we're already watching the next one and the one after that. It's called the Parade of Storms, and you can see it here. This is a clipper that's going to bring light snow on Thursday to southern Ontario, but this is the one in the west that we are tracking closely because it also has some extremely cold air on the north flank, and that encompasses all of the Prairies and soon BC as well. This is air from Siberia that has come over the pole, and Friday could be one of the coldest days we've seen in quite some time, with high temperatures staying below -30 locally in Alberta, with wind chills approaching -50. So it's cold out west, and that cold is eventually heading east, but not before another strong storm with a very similar impact across the eastern half of Canada. Behind it, lake effect snow, and that's going to be a concern right into the middle of next week. Donna?
Blame it on Siberia, Anthony. Thanks. In British Columbia, Avalanche Canada is warning of a considerable avalanche risk for most of that province's backcountry. Forecasters say the recent heavy snowfall means the snow is not yet settled. 14 people died in avalanches in BC last year. In California, one person is dead after an avalanche at Palisades Tahoe Ski Resort. The slide happened this morning about 30 minutes after the resort opened. It involved steep slopes in an area used by expert skiers and snowboarders. Police say another person sustained minor injuries. Search efforts have now concluded. The resort was home to the 1960 Winter Games. Property taxes are going up in many Canadian cities, but people in Toronto are bracing for what could be the biggest increase ever. Property taxes could jump 10.5% in 2024 to cover a $1.8 billion shortfall in this year's budget due to chronic underfunding of city services. And there could be an additional 6% increase if the federal government doesn't provide funding for refugees and asylum seekers in Toronto's shelter system.
I did not create this financial mess, but it needs to be fixed. We need to get the city back on track.
There are proposed property tax spikes in cities across the country, more than 7% in Vancouver and Calgary, nearly 5% in Montreal. Most of Canada's other major cities have kept it to a single-digit increase. Canada's health minister says the federal government will do everything in its power to ensure the national drug supply does not face any shortages after Florida was approved to import cheaper Canadian pharmaceuticals.
There is no way we will allow any jurisdiction, be it a state or another foreign jurisdiction, to endanger the Canadian drug supply.
Last week, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration authorized Florida to import certain pharmaceuticals in bulk from Canadian wholesalers. Health Minister Mark Holland says the proposal is inappropriate, adding the U.S. politicians should not be looking to Canada to solve their drug pricing problems. He says he will be raising the issue with U.S. officials during an upcoming visit to Washington. Officials in Ecuador say at least 10 people have been killed in a wave of violence that has brought the South American nation to a standstill. Heavily armed soldiers roamed the streets of Ecuador's biggest cities today, which were largely deserted, a day after the President Daniel Noboa declared his country was at war. The opponent is nearly 24 gangs that have taken over some of the nation's largest prisons and are said to be holding more than 130 people hostage. Mike Drolet on the escalating violence in what was once a peaceful haven.
With every car bomb and gunfight with police, The drug gangs fighting for control of Ecuador's underworld grow bolder. In broad daylight, cars are lit on fire despite a heavy police and military presence, leaving regular citizens terrified they'll get caught in the crossfire. We live in constant fear, says this man, because we don't know if we'll come home from work in one piece. The current crisis devolved after Adolfo Fito Macias, a drug lord who was immortalized in this narco worship video, escaped from prison on Sunday. After President Daniel Noboa declared a state of emergency on Monday in hopes of recapturing Fito, all hell broke loose, which led to armed gang members taking brief control of a TV station during a live broadcast.
This is one of the most dramatic shifts in South American politics in recent years, a sudden increase in political and criminal violence in Ecuador. It's really quite an astonishing and worrisome new trend.
Ecuador, explains UBC political science professor Max Cameron, fell victim to political corruption over the past decade, which opened the door for the drug cartels to gain control of the prisons and the ports. When President Noboa came to power in November, he pledged to restore peace. Today, he says Ecuador is now at war.
And I think that's right. I think this is what we might call a kind of a critical juncture. This is a moment in Ecuador's history where the kinds of decisions that are possible and the kinds of decisions that are made are going to shape the future of that country for quite a long time to come.
For now, the streets in the capital, Quito, remain chaotic as Ecuadorians come to grips with the violence that has engulfed the country. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
A diplomatic mission coming up, what the U.S. Secretary of State is trying to achieve in the Middle East. The World Health Organization says it continues to face what it calls near insurmountable challenges getting humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's had to cancel 7 aid missions since December 26th, including one today because it didn't get permission from Israel. The organization says aid requests were refused and safe passage was not guaranteed. It says it has supplies, teams, and plans in place. What it doesn't have is access, and it's calling on Israel to approve requests. Israel denies it's creating bottlenecks, saying it's increased capacity to inspect aid and reopened a border crossing last month. As Israel's siege on Gaza goes on, an Israeli delegation is in Cairo for new talks on the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And the U.S. Secretary of State continues his diplomacy efforts, telling Israeli leaders countries like Saudi Arabia are willing to normalize relations with Israel after the war ends, but only if there is a path to a future Palestinian state. Right now, as Crystal Gamansing reports, there is no path to peace.
Sorrow with no end in sight. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society says an Israeli airstrike hit one of its ambulances in central Gaza, killing 4 staff members. A direct target means we won't be able to save the lives of the wounded. Israel's closest ally, the United States, had just urged them to do more to protect civilian lives in Gaza. IDF officials have said they are moving to a targeted phase of the war, one that would be less intense. But the day brought more death and despair. 14 houses full of children and women, full of men and newborns, too. Who should we complain to?
Our goal is to rid Gaza of Hamas terrorists and free our hostages. Once this is achieved, Gaza can be demilitarized and de-radicalized, thereby creating a possibility for a better future for Israel and Palestinians alike.
The United States is looking to the Palestinian Authority as a possible leader in Gaza after the war, but it failed there previously, leaving Gaza open for Hamas. Blinken's visit led to demonstrations in the streets of Ramallah. Some got into shoving matches with security teams. They oppose Blinken being in the Palestinian territory because of America's support for Israel and its war. A claim that Israel is committing genocide will go before the International Court of Justice starting Thursday. The case was brought forward by South Africa. Such a ruling could take years, but an immediate order could be issued calling for Israel to halt its operations. Even if that happens, it's unlikely to bring about an end to the fighting in Gaza. Donna?
Crystal Gamansing in London tonight. Thanks, Crystal. U.S. and British naval forces say they've shot down 21 drones and missiles over the Red Sea launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Britain says yesterday's attack was the largest yet on Red Sea shipping. There were no reported injuries or damage, but the U.S. claims it was the 26th time commercial shipping lanes have been targeted since November 19th. The Houthis are promising to step up pressure in the area until Israel stops the siege on Gaza. The U.S. says many of the Houthi attacks are targeting vessels with no ties to Israel and that they are unlawful and escalatory. Hunter Biden surprised Republicans today when he unexpectedly arrived at a U.S. House committee hearing that was voting to hold him in contempt of Congress. Biden sat quietly in the front row as the Oversight Committee delivered opening statements. The committee voted in favor of formally recommending the House hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena in the Republican impeachment inquiry into his father. Biden was subpoenaed to testify behind closed doors last month as part of the inquiry. He refused to comply, insisting he will only testify in public. Still ahead, why Rebel News is threatening to sue the RCMP. The RCMP says it's looking into the arrest of a commentator for Rebel News. David Menzies was taken into custody after trying to ask Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland a question outside an event in Ontario on Monday.
Ms. Freeland, how come the IRGC is not a terrorist group? Why is your government supporting Islamo-Nazis? What? What are you doing?
You're under arrest for assault. Why are you pushing me? You're under arrest for assault.
This video posted by Rebel News shows Menzies attempting to ask Freeland questions on a sidewalk and then told he is being arrested for assault for pushing into the RCMP officer. Menzies was later released without charge. The RCMP is facing questions about what some are calling a heavy-handed response. Rebel News calls it a false arrest and is threatening legal action against the RCMP. Alaska Airlines is preemptively canceling all flights on Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes until Saturday. The Seattle-based airline says 110 to 150 flights a day will be grounded, while it awaits new instructions from Boeing and federal officials on how to inspect the fleet. Last Friday, a door plug blew out of an Alaska Airlines plane mid-flight. The only other carrier in the U.S. or Canada that operates the MAX 9 is United Airlines, and it is also canceling flights. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this double rainbow in Coquitlam, British Columbia. A little bit of brightness and light. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.